Good night, everyone, and you join our regular Wednesday party political broadcast with the Workers' Party of Britain. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from some prospective councillors and Senate members from the Workers' Party. So to introduce them, here is Deputy Leader Joti Brar.
Thanks very much, Dan. Welcome members and audience members, followers to our meeting this evening. It's another panel format. And this evening, our discussion is going to be with some of our prospective candidates, as Dan said. So I'm going to start straight away by introducing the first one of those to you. She is Claire Stranach. She is running for the council election in Halewood South in Merseyside. Claire's a secondary school teacher. Many of you will be familiar with her already from our online meetings over the last year, where she's made some very insightful and moving contributions, very thoughtful secondary school teacher with a particular interest, I think, in education and the family, but I know she can talk in an interesting way on practically anything. So Claire, tell us a little bit about yourself, please. What brought you to the Workers' Party? What is it in particular that you want to be standing for in terms of policy in Merseyside?
Hi, Joti, thank you. I actually want to talk about my story first before I talk about the Workers' Party, if you don't mind. And I'm glad you mentioned their education, but you also mentioned family. I suspect that many people find socialism through experience. Life happens and you seek answers and you feel lost or distraught or angry. And socialism for me is the only answer. But let me begin by telling a couple of things. My partner and I lost a very close family friend. We were at his funeral a week ago. He'd been misdiagnosed with cancer and phoned my partner because he was very, very concerned that he would not get palliative care. This is a man who had worked in social work, so he knew the system. He had a very close family, but I guess they were a little bit in denial about his condition. And so that stayed with me, him saying, I think I deserve it. And you think, oh my God, end of life care, that there should be any questions at all about how you get taken care of when you're ill, when you're dying, to me it's just completely astounding. And I think it's something that I push away and think it won't happen to me, it won't happen to mine. But there it was, happening to somebody who has been a tremendous part of my life. He didn't blame the NHS. He was misdiagnosed and they struggled to get him well, but couldn't. And I think it took like 8 weeks and then he died. He didn't blame the NHS at all. Didn't really blame the COVID. But that's basically where the responsibility lies, doesn't it? In how we distribute funds for ordinary people in their ordinary lives. Another issue that came to mind with that was my mum. My mum died at 86. I brought her to live with us thinking that we could have a little granny flat. And given that the mantra in my house was always, don't put me in a home. Whatever you do, don't put me in a home. I thought, well, okay, come on, she can live with us. Now, it was a roller coaster. It wasn't easy. I'm glad we did it on reflection. But at the end, I couldn't cope. I was working full time. I couldn't cope with her care. And so she was indeed put in a home. And it was awful. And I still feel haunted by her last weeks. Just awful. You wouldn't do it to an animal, is what I think. You would not do it to an animal. And yet, a few months before she went into residential care, she'd had a fall, went into hospital, and was put into a sort of rehabilitation place run by the NHS. And it was great. She got nursing care, she got nutritious food, she made friends with the nurses, she made friends with the other women in there, and she was happy. And so what was the difference? The difference was investment. The difference was training. The people who were looking after her in that rehabilitation centre were regarded as professionals, were paid as such, and the care was of a good standard. By the time she got into a private residential home, it was a completely different ballgame. And please, you know, a big banner outside from the Quality Care Commission saying it was good, and I believed it. You're just absolutely at sea. When you're treated as an individual, a consumer, you're absolutely at sea at the times in your life when you're least able to cope. Making choices about what home my mum should go into. Do you know what I wanted? It's like what I wanted with my children with school. Just something local, something good, or preferably very good, something easy to get to. That's all I want. I don't want to shop around. That's not my skill set. I'm not a nurse. I'm not a doctor. I can just about make a choice for my child's school, but even then I don't feel tremendously well qualified at doing that. So my mum had been a Labour Party member all her life and had supported the union. So she would blame privatisation. She'd blame the Tories for being avaricious, for profiteering. She was completely right. But you know what? Where was she going to turn? The Labour Party. The Labour Party introduced PFI. How much did they stand up against austerity? Nowhere near enough. I mean, they're on the side of austerity. Can you believe it? Bailout for bankers, but we're not going to look after working people. And it was something you said, Joti, which I come back to time and time again. Working class people just don't ask for enough. It's almost embarrassing how little we ask for. Do you know what? End of life care is up there as a priority for all of us, because it's going to happen to all of us and all of our families. So neither our friend nor my mum would blame hospital workers who are underfunded, understaffed, demoralised. I don't know how they do it. And also care workers. Now, some members of my family are critical of care workers. And it's that victim blaming, isn't it? We're going to underpay you. We're going to put you on 0-hour contracts. We're not going to train you properly. We're going to treat you really, really poorly. And then people are going to be dissatisfied with what you provide. And then they're going to blame you. They shouldn't be blamed. People who enter care work, you know, it should be a prestigious thing to enter into because it's a really difficult job. Anything that involves human beings is tiring and complex and requires training and management, good management, none of which is available through the private sector, none at all. Those words like, I've made a list of them, customers, consumers, providers, package, vouchers. God, I hate the language of the marketplace unless I'm going to buy coffee or go for a meal. I do not want that language near me and healthcare or education, the things that are uniquely human. I do not want the marketplace because it does not provide what we need. Because what we need is antithetical to the market. They're looking to build profit. We're not. We're looking for, well, I'll turn to something positive. We're looking for what we say in point 7 of the 10-point plan. I'll digress slightly. You said about being in the Workers' Party. Corbyn briefly rekindled my interest in the Labour Party. And I naively thought, yay, socialism. Not a bit of it. So once the Corbyn project was completely and utterly bombed out the water, I was at a loss. I found the Workers' Party because I respect George Galloway. And then I read the 10-point plan programme and I thought, oh, this is it. Now, point 7 for me, I didn't realise it at the time, but I love all of it. But point 7 is for me is very important. And if you don't mind, I'll just read it. High quality, free provision of all necessary support services for the disabled. I'm going to get emotional now. As well as the elderly. Full state support to enable families to look after their elderly with nursing homes and sheltered accommodation for those who need it. So that all workers, and this is the bit that gets me every time, so that all workers are able to live full, dignified and meaningful lives. God, if you can't support that, do you have a heart? And I really resent when people say, oh, how utopian, how naive. No, not at all. The opposite, in fact, it's eminently doable and eminently achievable. And even if you think, well, it's going to be a while, is that not the good fight? Is that not what it's all about? To make sure that we live meaningful lives. You know, we're only here once. This is our go. And, you know, you better make the best of it for yourselves, you know, and for others. And so, although I'm standing in, I'm standing in Halewood South, and I don't really feel all that qualified to do it. I feel I have the heart for it. I feel I genuinely have the heart for it. So I have faith in others that have said, go for it. And I'm thinking, yeah, okay, why not? Let's go on this journey. And let's see, you know, see how it goes. But I'm sure that ward has lots of care workers. And I'm sure that ward has lots of people who are in need of care. And it's only this party that gives a damn. That's what I really think. And that's what's been proven over the past few months. So thank you very much, Joti. Thank you.
Claire, that was beautiful. Thank you. Such a powerful contribution. And you missed out, of course, one of the horrible words I use, which is client, one of my absolute favourites. In particular, when you're using, you know, some kind of health service or, you know, it's so inappropriate, isn't it? You're absolutely right. But this kind of depersonalisation and this language of shopping and of the market, and a slightly, from a different angle, a story of my own about this sense of like, why am I being forced to shop at this moment? I remember feeling that very strongly when I was pregnant with my first child. You know, and you get towards labour and you've got to kind of sort things out in your house for the arrival of a new baby, and you've never had a baby before, and you don't really know what you need, and you're trying to work it out. And, you know, you need a buggy, and you need to buy some kind of buggy and travel system, you know, carry for the car and everything before you've had a baby, before you've ever used any of this stuff. And so you start trying to look into it, and the marketing is insane. And lots of the buggies will say to you, oh, other buggies are not healthy for your baby. This type of buggy is healthy for your baby. If you don't buy this kind of buggy, your baby will have bad posture for life, or a bad back, or will have this. And you're like, why are they selling buggies that are bad for my baby? And how do I know? And I remember thinking, do you know what I want at this point in my life? I want some support. I want a local mothers club that has a stock of researched, decent. Why are we making more than one type of buggy? I just want the one that's definitely good, flexible, does the job, will be good for my baby, right? If we've got some science that says the baby should face this way or that way, great, implement it. But don't make me choose on the basis of your marketing. You know, and as you say, in so many areas of our life, at times when we don't know what we're doing, we're vulnerable to marketing and spiel, and we're not in a position to judge the sales pitch of these people. Why should you be reading the sales brochures for care homes? They shouldn't have sales brochures. They should be care homes. You know, that's what they're for. You're absolutely right, Claire. It's totally inhuman to turn these things into businesses. It distorts all of our relationships, this relationship of the market, of profit, of exchange. You know, everything is a service that you buy or don't. And you've highlighted there, you know, there are so many experiences we all have of how the system fails working people on a daily basis, you know, and it's absolute lack of humanity, you know, the lack of right to the basic things that matter in life. We no longer have the right to a home. How can that be the case when there's so much wealth sloshing around the globe and sloshing around this country in particular? We as workers don't have the right to a home. That right was given away on the day they brought in the policy of the right to buy. Right to buy meant abolition of the right to a home. They didn't say that to us, did they, when they brought that in? You know, but the things that matter, housing, healthcare, education, secure jobs, meaningful work, social facilities, meaningful community, you know, culture, these things, we don't have the right to them, but they're the things that make life meaningful and make life that you need to live properly, to live as a human being. Instead, we're turning to clients and given sales brochures for the things that should just be part of how our lives are, to have or not have, depending on whether or not we can put demand in the market, i.e. have you got enough cash in your pocket to, you can look through all the sales brochures you like, but they're no good to you if you don't have the cash in your pocket to exchange for the service. And then you've just got to cross your fingers and hope you pick the right one, yeah? But you're absolutely right. When it comes to socialism, it's a completely different mindset, isn't it? Because to a socialist society, it's people are our most important asset. And we grudge nothing in the service of and the care of and the development of our people, because they are what make our society. I'm going to leave it there and introduce another one of our panelists tonight. We've got David Kerr, who's running in Dover Town, down on the Kent coast. Dave, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself, what brought you to the Workers' Party, and what in particular interests you where you're standing.
Okay, good evening everybody from the, don't know what I can call it, the independent southeast, the independent Dover. It seems like everywhere's breaking up at the moment, but anyway, welcome to evening in Dover. Just one for Rob. Rob, you must know my clan motto. Cyril said serio, late in earnest, because I actually booked my appointment with the returning officer, still waiting for the letter of authorization, but it did come today, so hopefully tomorrow we'll be up and get going. Okay, how did it all start? I really don't know, to be honest. It started, I was disillusioned after 40 years with the Labour Party. It kept getting my hope up. We had John Smith, and sadly he passed away. And then, being a member of the Labour Party, it just seemed my whole life was waiting and then nothing, waiting, then nothing. So after the latest escapade with Jeremy Corbyn, I'd had enough. I fed up with disappointments, but there was nothing else. For me in this area, there was nothing else. And then I happened upon the Workers' Party. I started to have a look at it and I thought, this is what I'm all about. And I'll tell you something, I think in Dover, there's thousands of people like me. People don't realise Dover is very, very much a working class area. We had the coal mines, we've got the pit villages around, we've got the ferry industry, fishing, etc. So I think the potential here is fantastic, and this is what I need to really start to be working on. Yeah, a little bit about me. Just going on about how I got it. I went on the Twitter feed, and George Galloway has always been to me he's my hero. For years, I've listened to him for years. And even when everybody was against him, at that time, I was a Royal Marine. I was listening to him, this anti-war, what he was talking about in Iraq. Now, I was a Royal Marine for 18 years. And one of the things on our manifesto is the withdrawal from NATO. That struck me as something. I thought I need to look more into this. And then when I'm sat back and I'm thinking, when I've been in active service, who have I had stood beside me? Because this is what NATO's about, the support for everybody. I never had a Frenchman stood next to me. I never had a German stood next to me. I never had an Italian stood next to me. I always felt that the UK was alone in the active service that I'd done. Crunch came in 1992. The Royal Marines, I don't know if you're on the first Iraq invasion, were not really involved too much. It was an armored type thing, But we went in between the two Iraq wars, and we were in the area of Tikrit Kurdistan, and our job there, allegedly, was to look after an Iraqi infantry division to make sure they were behaving themselves because they were outside the exclusion zone. It was then when we started to get people to train without our knowledge. And this is when I thought there's skullduggery going on here. you know. And when I came back, I had a long chat with my wife, who was expecting at the time. And I says, I don't like what I'm in at the moment. I really don't like it. Even though I only had basically 4 years left for my full pension, I made the decision to leave because I didn't want to be in a situation where I was basically fighting for a lie. After that, I went to drive trains for Eurotunnel for 10 years, straight afterwards. And then after this, I followed basically an old career path. I went back to sea. I started on the cruise ships. I've always had a great interest in the sea. And it was then when the piracy started in Somalia, and it was like a natural progression as an ex-Royal Marine to go into the security, what we called armed security. As David Cameron said, before he changed his mind, we were just mercenaries. My view was these ships, and especially the crews, needed protecting. This is why I done it. And it worked. People, you get these stupid questions about contacts. I'll be honest with you, I had very, very few contacts in the 10 years I've done this. I wasn't on it for that. I was on about there for protection, for instruction. At the same time, I realized the problems. It's like a lot of things in the world, isn't it? You understand the problem, but you just don't like the way it's being fought. Yeah. So I understand the problems in Somalia. I spent a lot of time in Yemen, which obviously is news at the moment, in Al-Makala. So I went through this. Now, how did I get to be where I am now? You think with this career, and then of course now I'm now a bus driver. Well, I was a bus driver for Stagecoach until about 3 days ago when I resigned. No great reason why I resigned. I just got fed up doing 48 hours 1 week and 60 hours the next week for 39 hours pay. You know, so I thought, right. And I did get an offer of another job that I'd done for a little while before. So that's where I'm going back to. But going, how does somebody with this career be such a socialist? I was born and brought up in Paisley, which is 7 or 8 miles west of Glasgow. Famous for its cotton mills, Coates's cotton mills. In 1972, after over 100, in fact, 1775, these mills were created in Paisley. The padlocks were on the gate in 1972. That was 20% of Paisley's workforce out of work. That was 10,000 in the Anchor Mill, 10,000 in the Fergusley Mill, out of work. Yeah. This is a little bit of a sad part for me. I had a sister, she died. My mum and dad were on the picket line the day after she died. That was their belief. Claire was saying before, you find things through your family. This is where I found it, you know. It was later on with an interview with the MI5, I actually found out my great-grandmother was a member of the Communist Party. I didn't know that till they told me. And then they're asking me, why didn't you tell us? I said, well, I didn't know. So there you go. That gives you an idea of what they're up against, yeah. Dover, to me, is a socialist sleeping giant. The reason I know this is the employment you do. For 6 months, I stood in as manager in a little greasy spoon cafe in the town centre. Yeah. No disrespect, that's the people you get in there. They come in, they chat. While I was there, I thought, I'm going to open this up to other things. I opened up a bit of a comedy club at night, and I let people have the union meetings there. Get to learn. As a bus driver, my goodness, do you learn about people working class as a bus driver? This is where you really, really, really see the struggle. Really see the struggle. Listen to people, ask them what they want. I've been the chairman of the union at my depot for 4 years. That brings me into direct contact through CBC meetings, CCC meetings, committee meetings. Yeah, the CCC is where we talk to directors to really put across, and I did, where they're going wrong. And that's really what it was. I think they're quite glad to get rid of me, actually. Although I have had very, very kind emails, all four, from the managing director, operations director, engineering director, and the commercial director. They've sent me lovely emails. And I was surprised more with the commercial director, because he's the one that I was at Horns with him for 4 years. And I think he's actually come back and he's gave me a nice email. So I'm happy with that. Going back to I can say this now, I've left them. Going back to my work as Stagecoach, Jodi, the last meeting we were talking about fragmentation, independence, etc., etc., etc. How many people here know? I live in Dover. Dover has a Stagecoach depot, but I work in Folkestone, at Folkestone Stagecoach depot. Now, if I get on the bus, go to my depot in Folkestone, and it's a Dover driver driving that bus, I'm getting £1 an hour more than what he is. There's 7 depots in the southeast. Each has got a different pay grade. This is fragmentation. This is the way they like to work. Keep everybody, and they say that your pay award, I actually negotiate quite a decent pay award, and they say the pay award is down to how much money the depot is making. How unfair is that? Folkestone has class routes. We have the gold service to Canterbury. We are going to make more money than Dover. So our negotiation is through what the depot takes. Dover, local, poor area. It's so unfair. So just before I left, I've left them with a, let's just say, a bit of a headache. I've gone national. What I've actually done is I've used this COVID, which they've handled probably just as bad as our government, if not worse, for the bus drivers. We've lost many, many bus drivers to this dreaded disease. They've not protected the drivers. They think by putting a bit of cling film over the holes is going to protect us. We can't enforce mask wearing. We can't do this. We can't do that. We can't do that. We've lost quite a few guys to the COVID. So what they've done is our negotiation for our pay after a 3-year deal was last July. They've halted all negotiations because of COVID. Yeah, something to do with the grant. I've looked into the grant. There's nothing in the grant that says that companies can't negotiate or at least review pay. What I've done is I've gone national, and the National Union Committee have now gone to Perth, and they want a national pay review and national pay negotiations, which, as we all know, will be point blankly refused. So my leaving part to my drivers at Folkestone was make sure the union has your correct address, contact details. So that's about my life story. I hope I didn't bore you too much.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Dave. And you brought up some really interesting and diverse points there. A couple of them I want to come back in on. On the last point that you were saying, it's very noticeable right now how COVID is being used as an excuse for all kinds of things. COVID is an excuse for attacking our civil liberties. COVID is an excuse for attacking our pay and our conditions even more than they have been in the last 20, 30, 40 years. COVID is a handy excuse for anything the ruling class wants to do right now, for so long as the working class is not organised and able to properly fight back. And as you pointed out there again, privatisation was a way of transferring wealth from the poor to the rich, because in order to create profits for shareholders, what had to be done was to make workers cheaper and more flexible. More flexible means you work, as you said, any hours you're asked to work. You have no right to protected time off. It means you don't have proper sick pay, holiday pay, pensions, all the rest of it. Your hourly rate goes down and down and down in real terms. That means you just never get a pay rise, right, till the minimum wage catches up with you. That's what so many people have found since we got the minimum wage. It wasn't a working class measure that made our lives better. It was a boss's minimum wage set incredibly low. And many people in many areas of work have found since the minimum wage was instituted, they stopped getting pay rises until the minimum wage caught up with them. And now we find the majority of people's work is minimum wage work, or a very, you're supposed to be really grateful if your work is paid 20 or 30p above minimum wage, it's some kind of great victory. And our rights at work have been, really demolished over the last few decades, and you've talked about that. I wanted to come back again on something you were talking about with the armed forces. Number one, you sort of pointed out with your example of what happened to the factory at Paisley, what drives so many young men in particular into the armed forces is, of course, poverty, lack of opportunity, lack of options. And we see this time and again. We have quite a few soldiers, former soldiers in the Workers' Party, and they pretty much tell the same story. They were driven into the armed forces by lack of opportunity, lack of education, lack of work where they lived, lack of hope, really, a lack of opportunity. And what we believe very strongly in the Workers' Party is that the armed forces should be defensive, not aggressive. Britain has no right to be fighting in any of the wars it's currently fighting in. Some of them it fights openly, some of them it fights covertly. The war in Syria, in Yemen, there's lots of, in Ukraine, there are lots of places where armed forces of Britain are active, are either training or supporting or covertly joining in with armed conflicts without letting the British taxpayer and elector know about it, really. But we believe also that soldiers should have the right to unionize so that they can use their collective power to refuse illegal orders, to refuse to fight in illegal and aggressive wars, to refuse to be complicit in the war crimes of our ruling classes. This is the right of workers. They should not be in a position where they're forced to participate in the crimes of the ruling class, because our interests are not their interests. And as you said, you're sold all kinds of lies in the armed forces about what you're fighting for and why you're fighting, and you're in the middle of it before you can really wake up and see, hang on a minute, this isn't right. And then what do? Individuals trying to stand up get court-martialed, and one or two brave individuals do sometimes do that, but that doesn't change anything in the system. We need soldiers to be able to collectively stand up and say no, just as we need workers to be unionized so that they can collectively stand up and refuse to participate in these illegal war crimes. And that's why, it's very high on our 10-point program. I think it's number one, in fact, isn't it? That we would pull Britain out of all imperialist wars, out of NATO, which is an imperialist, warmongering, aggressive alliance. There's nothing defensive about NATO, despite its propaganda, kind of strap lines. It's always been an aggressive machinery. And yeah, as far as we're concerned, the armed forces are for defense only. And our soldiers shouldn't be put in these horrendous positions as they are at the moment. I'm going to come on next. Sorry, I have to turn my pieces of paper around. I've got Daniel Cosby. So our viewers will know Dan. He often introduces these meetings. He's a technician for us when getting these broadcasts to run properly. He is also our candidate for the council election in Ealing Broadway in West London. So Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your campaign?
Yeah, thank you, Joti. So to introduce myself and my journey to the Workers' Party, basically, a really brief overview, comes from my upbringing under the Blair years, I think. And that's one reason I never really saw the Labour Party as a socialist party. I never saw the Labour Party as a party of the ordinary working people. I never saw them as a viable alternative to the Tory party, because I grew up when things were getting worse under Labour, and then they took us into the Iraq War, and so I started questioning everything around me about our political system, about the way our society works, and wondering, why isn't it working for ordinary people? Why aren't things getting better when we have all this amazing technology? You know, we read every day about breakthroughs and advances, and yet things are getting worse. And then at what cost is our society propped up for the few that it is working for? Well, the cost of millions of lives around the world through that war, through pollution, and through other things, not to mention the lives lost here through the cutting of services and education and many other things. So, to my eternal shame, when I was a teenager, in the first election I could vote for, I voted for Liberal Democrats, because I thought, well, they're not Labour and they're not Tory, and those are the only two political parties that have been in the past century, basically. And they didn't get in my area because we have first past the post, and where I was voting in was always a Conservative area, and it always has been. And so my vote locally felt like, you know, it was a drop in the ocean. It made no difference. But nationally, I think a lot of other people were thinking the same, because the Liberal Democrats had enough seats to form a coalition government with the Tories. And they then went and reneged on all of the promises, all of the major promises they made before the election. They said they weren't going to raise tuition fees. As we now know, tuition fees have tripled since they were in. And so many other things, cutting social services, job seekers particularly, cutting benefits. You know, all these things they did when they were in, they just played a very small second fiddle to the Tories. And, you know, who knows what benefit they think they made while they were in that coalition government. And so I started looking around, you know, what is a way to make change? What is a way that, you know, ordinary people can get involved in politics, and not as part of these behemoth political parties, which are completely moribund, which act in complete contradistinction to the interests of the ordinary working people, who lie through their teeth constantly. They always tell us one thing and they do another. And so I started researching and, you know, came to the ideas of socialism. You know, how can society work when we have all this advanced technology, all this progress, all this organization? You know, we can achieve massive things. We can, you know, we produce enough food to feed more than the population of the world, and yet we have people starving. We have enough homes, we have enough empty houses in Britain to house the homeless population many times over. You know, we have the resources, the technology, everything, but they're not being used to benefit society and to benefit everyone in society. And so when the Workers' Party came along, I was happy to join and to put my name forward to stand as a councillor for Ealing Broadway. And I hope by getting out there and discussing things with people in Ealing, that we can inform of the party what we stand for and let people know that there is an alternative, that there is a way for them to come together and to have a voice and to actually make a difference in politics. There's a few big issues locally, but there are also big issues nationally. So one is housing and development. There's a local campaign group called Stop the Towers, which is a very good cause, and they make very, very eloquent and comprehensive arguments against the overdevelopment. If you're not familiar with Ealing particularly well, it's I've nicknamed the Queen of the Boroughs, because a lot of it is 2 or 3 story residential housing. It's a very nice suburb to live in, essentially, and commute to other places or work in if you work here. But there's certain areas that have started looking like little Manhattans. If you go to North Acton Station, it's all filled with new towering skyscrapers, and there's more popping up everywhere. And these actually contribute a massive amount to pollution. They're not actually designed to solve the problem of overcrowding or not enough homes. You know, we have thousands and thousands and thousands of people, over 10,000 people, on the waiting list for council homes, but only a fraction of these developments end up actually being council homes. The rest are quote unquote affordable homes, which are if they're affordable, that means you can buy a studio flat that you can't swing a cat in, but you can only buy 25% of it because that's all you can afford as, you know, a young person trying to get onto the property market. And then there's the rest of them, which are really just designed to be investments for overseas investors. And we've seen it across London, where these places are advertised in Singapore or Hong Kong rather than actually being advertised locally. So these are just investment opportunities, and they're actually, you know, not good for people in the borough that need housing. They're not good for the environment. They actually cause a massive amount of pollution. They're not designed to be sustainable, to be to last long. You know, these are caught up in the kind of planned obsolescence, and, you know, not designed to live long enough to offset all the energy and carbon that goes into actually producing them. Not to mention, if they did fill up, which they probably wouldn't, because like many other places, they'll probably just be empty investment opportunities. If they did fill up, it will put massive strains on an already strained transport network. And, you know, that brings me on to another thing that Ealing Council have been doing, which are these low traffic neighbourhoods. In principle, a great idea, you know, make neighbourhoods where people live, residential neighbourhoods, have less pollution, less busy car traffic, so it's safer, it's quieter, it's less polluted. You know, that's a good thing in essence. But the way that they've done it is to implement it without consultation, without discussing it with people, and in such a way that it's causing a misery for so many residents who find themselves now unable to easily get out of their own homes, to use their own cars, and even for things like emergency services, delivery services, they're finding it a nightmare. And that is a very top-down approach to what should be, you know, a community-based, cohesive approach of, you know, what would work for this neighbourhood, this area, this community. And simply telling people that they can't use their cars, which many people need for work, they need to ferry around relatives, disabled people, etc. Simply telling people that, no, you can't drive here anymore isn't good enough if you don't provide other solutions. We've got Crossrail coming in, which is a couple of years delayed, won't be here for another while, but even that is too little too late. And so all of these things together are just not making any sense for the people of Ealing. And there's a common criticism of socialism is that, you know, people think we want to take things away from people. You know, we want to take from all of the haves. Doesn't matter what you have, we want to take it and give it to the have-nots, which simply isn't true. Socialism is going to benefit the vast majority of people in Britain. So there's plenty of people worrying about, you know, will I have my house taken away from me? Will I have my car taken away from me? What I think people should be thinking about is what's being taken away from me now? What's being taken away from me by the national Tory government? What's being taken away from me by the local Labour councils? Because we're having cuts to education, to social services, to, well, I don't know if there are any youth clubs or youth centres left anymore, any activities for young people that can educate them, train them, give them hobbies, give them a nice atmosphere to learn and develop in, and to go on to be productive, happy, fulfilled human beings. All of these opportunities have been taken away, while at the same time, everything else is being sold off. So all these property developments, all the local areas being sold off, turned into high rises that we don't want and that aren't for us. The police services are being cut and stripped back. I mean, you know, you talk to so many people who have had a break-in and they call the police, and the police know that the only reason they're answering the phone is to give the other person an insurance number. And the person who's called in this crime is stunned to find out that it's not going to be investigated. No one's going to come around and have a look. There's not going to be any follow-up or aftercare. Even people that have been mugged, they just get the crime reference for the insurance number and that's it. Is that the role we want the police to be playing in our society? While we're allowing more and more people to fall into criminality by the lack of opportunities, the lack of education, social care development, the lack of jobs, and then the police simply responding to a few of the most urgent crimes, and anyone else who has an issue, who's been robbed, who's been burgled, just has to claim it on their insurance, and that's it. So even if you think, well, I'm doing all right, society is crumbling around you, and we really have to take control of it ourselves and turn it around. Otherwise, life is going to get a lot worse for everyone in this country. So that's a brief overview of why I thought I'd stand for Ealing Broadway.
That's beautiful, thank you, Dan. And you've pointed out some really essential issues there for working people, in particular housing and public transport. And it's very significant what you talk about there in terms of this constant building going on, and we're told don't put any obstacles in the way of developers because we need homes, and everybody knows there's a housing crisis and that there's loads of homeless and loads of workers who can't get decent homes, and so we're like, oh, okay, we mustn't stand in the way of developers. But if you stop for a moment and have a look at all this development, what you can't help noticing is none of it is for the people who need it, as you said. And the more houses that are built, or flats, or whatever they are, the more development that goes on, you can't help noticing the deeper the housing crisis gets. So once again, we see the problem and the divide between homes and building development for commodity purposes, for the market. The market is not interested in meeting the needs of the people. It's neither interested nor able to do so, because all the people don't have the same ability to exercise demand, i.e. to pay. And if you don't have the ability to pay, your need doesn't count. You could have 10 kids, but if you have no money, you won't even get a 2-bedroom flat, never mind a house that's big enough to fit you and all of your family in it. And this fundamental mismatch between what people need and what's being done is at the heart of every problem that we see in our society in terms of working people's problems. Buildings as a disposable commodity. I mean, you talk there, Dan, and it's actually horrific the way buildings now, big tower blocks, are built with built-in obsolescence, as if it was a cushion that you're going to throw it away after 10 years and change the colour. I mean, I'm lucky enough to live in a very old house, and I always look at it and think, wow, it's amazing how these buildings live so much longer than people. And that in itself shows you why buildings should be owned collectively by society and not individually by one or another person. We're fleeting presences, or we ought to be fleeting presences in the life of a building. But the fact that now, in order to keep the kind of development cycle running, you've got developers who are building shoddy buildings that they don't expect to last for long. They'll be happy to come along in 30 years' time, pull it down and put another one there. It's utterly shocking, such a waste of every type of resource. I have a friend who's an architect, and she used to talk about the frustration of going on courses where you'd learn about how you could build an environmentally friendly way. And then you go back to the office and you have the reality of the developers' demands, which are completely opposed to that sort of thing, because anything that eats into their profit, they're not interested in. They want it all done on a template, on a shoestring, as cheaply as possible. Everybody I know who works in any way connected to the building industry basically says to you now, never buy a new build, because they're so shoddy. They're not built properly, and they're certainly not built with any thought to the environment. They'd rather rip up more and more greenfield sites, for example, than develop on brownfield sites because it's cheaper. Never mind the fact that we're ruining the green belts and the countryside, and the houses that you put there are not really where they're needed, and everybody who moves in has to have a car for every adult because there's no infrastructure. The whole thing is insane and has nothing to do with what people need, and you're absolutely right about that, Dan. And just very quickly before I come on to our final panelist, on the topic of public transport, once again, I mean, if in London people still need their cars because the public transport isn't serving them properly, just think how terrible it is for most people around the country where public transport's all but disappeared. Where I live, I'm on the edge of Bristol, on the kind of rural side of Bristol, and a bit further out from me, the villages, they got like one bus a day, and those buses are threatened. They've cut down the service so much that it's useless to anybody, and then because they've made it useless, no one can rely on it, not many people are using it, then that's the justification for, well, we better get rid of it then. There's no one using this. And any service that isn't getting used very much, guess what? The council has to subsidise it. but they're taking over all the services that were really profitable and they're rinsing them for everything they can get. But when it comes to, you've forced everybody into cars, and then you come along and start harassing them and saying you shouldn't be using your car. And of course, the reality is, if you want to get people out of their cars, you can't take any measures to do that until you have fixed the public transport situation. And public transport is a right, it's an absolute right, and it should be cheap, it should be freely available, it should be integrated. You know, it's not just about the environment, although it's massively important for the environment that we have a proper public transport system, but for the people to be able to move freely without thinking or worrying about what the cost is going to be to get where they need to get to easily, quickly, reliably. You know, this, again, we consider it to be a fundamental right and an essential part of a modern and civilized society, that should be the case. Now, before I introduce you to our last panelist, I've been sent a little statement from one of our candidates, Steve Everett. He's running for the Senate in Central South Wales alongside Tess, who you all know, and some others. And unfortunately, his uncle died suddenly today and he couldn't be with us. So he sent us in a really nice little statement. I'm going to read it to you if that's all right. He says, and he doesn't say this in my accent, but you'll have to hear it in my accent. The exclusion of the working class has been a deliberate act on the part of the political establishment. We workers only have relevance for a photo opportunity or as a talking point for some focus group. There are plenty of socialist parties out there, some better than others. However, none have really been able to engage with us mere mortals or been able to talk in a language that has relevance to us and our community. This is the difference with the Workers' Party, and I, for one, have waited a long time for such a party to be formed, a party that doesn't judge my lack of academic success, my crude and blunt way of understanding the conditions within which I live, a party that offers hope and solutions to my problems, and most importantly, offers us the opportunity to build our own political party and political system. I fully understand why people feel the need to seek independence from our current politics. It isn't working for us, but this cannot be achieved by moving the geographic position of the seat of power. It is only achieved when we take political responsibility on ourselves. I'm a veteran of many a protest and petition, but the most we gain from these is some headlines at best. If we get ourselves elected, we will be able to vote against damaging policies. We will be able to drag into the public domain all those dirty deeds done dirt cheap. Even if all we achieve is to expose how rotten and ineffective our current political system is, then I'll take that as a win. I, hand on heart, have complete faith in the working class. I know we all have the necessary skills to be able to build a society that works for our interests, where opportunity for jobs, housing, education, health and security are equal. We only need to position ourselves to be able to learn the skills necessary to become the architects of our own destiny. I thought that was pretty cool. Thank you, Steve, and we look forward to meeting you properly another week. And finally, I want to introduce you to Clayton Payne. He is running for the council in Wisbech East. Wisbech, for those of you in other parts of the country who don't know, is a market town that sits between Peterborough and Kings Lynn in Cambridgeshire. Clayton, I won't say any more about you. I'll let you say it for yourself.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so yeah, my name's Clayton. I'm currently a master's student at London School of Oriental and African Studies, studying international development. I'm also on the research team at the Leprosy Mission of England and Wales. I'm currently researching health system strengthening in a low income setting. And I also work at a shelter in like near to where my university is. Yeah, so how did I get into this? So yeah, so before this, I did the same job for nearly 20 years. I worked in a factory, and then I went off and I ran a distribution company for nearly 20 years, which I gave up a year ago. And then because I had just given up my job, and the pandemic started, I went and worked for the NHS on the front line in King's Lynn Hospital, working on the COVID A&E and in the COVID wards until I started my university course. But also July, when I gave up, and it kind of calmed down a little bit by then. Politically, I would consider myself a Bennite socialist, and I never voted for the Labour Party until Jeremy Corbyn took over, because I've always seen the Labour Party, like the Conservatives, as being a neoliberal party, one which is more committed to the marketisation of everything we have in this country, from housing to public services, rather than actually looking after and protecting workers. And I was excited when Corbyn came in, because Corbyn, he was a disciple of Tony Benn's, and he still has a lot of things I believe in. Unfortunately, he wasn't strong enough to turn the tide within the party, and I left as soon as he was, as soon as the writing was on the wall. I found the Workers' Party. Obviously, I've always liked George Galloway. I liked his stance in Iraq back in 2003, I believe it was. And I used to listen to him on TalkSport and then Talk Radio, until he started, doing his Moat show on RT and on YouTube. And when he announced he was starting a Workers' Party, I immediately joined, because on a macro level, George stands for everything I stand for. He stands for no imperialist wars, and just everything we should stand for as working class people. We shouldn't be standing for running for fighting wars for the top 0.1% of this country, who are happy to send our boys off to die, boys and girls off to die for what are more or less just geopolitical exercises. I believe we need the Workers' Party, because we need to show how we can unpick socialism from the current narrative is currently suffering from two different narratives. It's currently suffering from this nonsense narrative of if you're a socialist, you must be authoritarian. Just because you're a socialist doesn't mean you believe in what Stalin did, doesn't mean you believe in Mao. We need to unpick the authoritarianism away from the current perception of socialism. And we also need to unpick it from the current wokeism that the current Labour Party has sort of led us to believe is part of a socialist theory. Wokeism is about dividing the working class. It's about putting us against each other, rather than realising that the differences in society shouldn't be against black or white or man or woman. It should be against rich or poor, because that's where the real difference is. And this is what we should be striving to actually change. So I don't want to go on too long, because I think it's quite late, but my own personal shtick is that my girlfriend is disabled. She was in a car accident 6 years ago, and she lost her leg. And as a result, I'm very, very aware of disabled issues in Wisbech, where we live, where there's over a period of time, all of our all the shops have migrated to the outskirts of town, which for people who are less abled, you can be living, instead of living, let's say, a maximum of a mile away from the town centre, you can be living like 3 to 4 miles away from those areas, which, if you're old, disabled, whatever, it's not a possible distance to walk. And being rural, there's no bus services. I mean, we live in a town with, although it's 30,000 people, there's no train service. So the only bus services is that if you want to go to the centre of town and go to King's Lynn or Peterborough, that's it. If you want to go to visit the actual shops where people shop, then walk. but there's not even proper roads, you know, proper pavements, because it's all designed for commuters. It's all designed for people in cars. So, you know, from a personal perspective, I'd like to see our council give proper transport to people, you know, at either zero or very low cost, so that, you know, the people who need it can get transported to the outskirts of town and do the shopping in Tesco's and in, you know, Sports Direct and all these other out of town places, because let's be fair, they've destroyed, you know, the centre of towns. Yeah, so that's it. I'll let I don't want to take up too much time, so I'll throw it back.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Clayton. Really happy to have you on board. And I hope people have seen from tonight that, you know, just a little taster of some of our candidates, but we are all, you know, we are genuine working class people trying to represent our communities, who are here not to make careers for ourselves, but because we want to serve and represent the working class, which is also our class, which is the class of the future, the class whose destiny it is to build a better, a fairer, a new type of society, a socialist society. And we want you to help us. We don't have rich benefactors. We don't have professional staffs. Every party worker is going to come from our ranks and be paid a pittance to help us do the work of organising our party. Apologies. And we need volunteers, we need members, we need people who are ready to get out and create a machinery on the streets that will help us to overcome all of the handicaps we face in this class war. We face the handicap of not having lots of money. We face the handicap of being blacked out by the media, manipulated our presence on social media. Every effort made to stop workers finding out that we're here and that a new kind of politics, a different kind of politics, working class politics are possible and are an option. And this election is not the main activity for us, but it is a marker, it is an opportunity for us to start building some of our branches, physically building them, meeting the workers in the places where we have branches, where we live, where we're standing. And if we're not standing in a place where you live, we'll be standing near enough for you to come and help out, come along and help with our campaigning, get to know us, help us to get to know the people in the areas, help us to build so that we can be in every single area. And I think I'll just leave you with the absite words of Steve again. We want to be the architects of our own destiny. And really it's time for the working class to overcome its divisions, the distractions, the diversions, join us and become the architect of your own destiny.